How's it going, everyone? John here from Neural DSP, and welcome to this deep dive of CorOS 3.0.0. This CorOS update brings along with it the highly anticipated plugin compatibility. We've got some new devices, features, and also some quality of life improvements. So let's dive in and explore why this is such an exciting update. In this CorOS release, we've included compatibility for both Plini X and Gojira X. And users that have already purchased these plugins will have access to them on their Quad Cortex simply by signing in to their Neural DSP account. We'll continue to release updated versions of our plugins over time, and compatibility for these will be available with future CorOS updates. This approach to releasing updated plugins allows us to get these into the hands of Quad Cortex users as soon as possible. But it's worth noting that plugin users can enjoy these updates right away. If you want to be the first to know about future plugin updates, make sure you're on our email list, following us on social media, and as always, we'll keep our website up to date over at neuraldsp.com. So let's take a look at the two updated plugins that are now compatible with Quad Cortex, Archetype Plini X and Archetype Gojira X. So after you've logged into your Neural DSP account on your Quad Cortex, go into the directory, and at the top left, you'll see we have a drop-down menu, and at the bottom, we have plugin presets. Here, we can access either Archetype Gojira X or Archetype Plini X. For now, we'll load up Archetype Gojira X and select the default preset. So that's the layout of Archetype Gojira X running on Quad Cortex. Here's how the default preset sounds. Now let's have a look at the blocks and new devices included on the grid. Starting off, after input 1, we then have the noise gate. So this is going to be the plugin gate, a new device. And then we have the transpose block after that, where we can transpose the pitch of our guitar. Next, we move on to the pitch effects from Archetype Gojira X, the first one being the Gojira Wow pedal. To demo this, I'm just going to plug in an expression pedal to Quad Cortex so I can show you how this sounds. Next, we have the second pitch device, and this is the Gojira octave pedal. Now we move on to the pre-effects blocks, the first of which is the Gojira Overdrive. After this, we then have the Gojira DRT pedal. After this, we then have some modulation devices in the pre-effects, the first of which is the Gojira Phaser. The final device from the pre-effects is another modulation device, and it's the Gojira Chorus. Moving on, we then have the amp block here on row 3, and opening it up, we're on the Gojira Hot amp. One difference to note is that when using the plugin UI, you would select the different amplifiers from one single amp page, whereas on the Quad Cortex UI, you select the 3 dots at the top left, go Change Device, and then in the device list, you'll see under Archetype Gojira X, we have the 3 amplifiers all listed as separate devices. So I'm going to select Gojira Clean, amplifier number 1, and here's how that sounds. Another way to quickly switch between amplifiers is to scroll with this foot switch through the various models in the device list. And here is amplifier number 2, Gojira Rust. And finally, we have amplifier number 3, Gojira Hot. Next, we have the cab block. And here, this is going to work in exactly the same way as the amplifiers. To change through the various devices, we can go up to the top left, change device, and you'll see we have the 3 cabs from Gojira X, and we have them in mono and stereo formats. For now, I'm just going to choose Gojira Cab 1 in mono and add it to the grid. And here's how it sounds. Here is cabinet number 2. And finally, cabinet number 3. We then have the Graphic 9 plugin EQ, where we've got the 9 faders for each of the individual bands, and also high pass, low pass, and output on the second page. After this, we then have the doubler, and here's how it sounds on its default setting of 6 milliseconds. Next, we're on to the post-effects section of Archetype Gojira X with our delay device here, the Gojira delay. And at the end of the chain, we have our final post effect, the Gojira reverb. As you can see, everything included in the plugin version of Archetype Gojira X is available here in Quad Cortex. Now let's take a look at the devices included in Archetype Plini X. We start off at the noise gate, the plugin gate. After that, we then have the transpose, and this can be used to transpose our pitch up and down. And currently I'm in standard tuning. But let's use this transpose to go down 2 semitones. Next, we move on to the pre-effects, the first of which is a compressor, and it's the Plini comp. Here's how it sounds with the compressor bypassed first. And now let's bring it in with the default settings. The next device is the Plini Octaver. Here's how that sounds with the default settings. After this, we then have an overdrive, and this is the Plini drive. We then have the first delay in Archetype Plini X, and it's the Plini pre-delay. Now we move on to the amplifiers. As was the case in Archetype Gojira X, we have all of the amplifiers here from Archetype Plini X as well. First, let's start on amp 1, the Plini Clean. Next, let's have a listen to amp number 2, the Plini Crunch. And then finally, amp number 3, Plini Lead. Next, let's move on to the cab block. In Archetype Plini X, there's only one cabinet available here in mono and stereo, and here we're going to use the mono version. Next, we move on to the Graphic 9 plugin EQ. Again, we have 2 pages for these parameters. After this, we then have the doubler, and bringing that up and engaging it with the default setting of 6 milliseconds sounds like this. Now we move on to the post effects, starting with a modulation device, the Plini Chorus. Now we move on to the second delay in Archetype Plini X, the Plini Delay. Finally, we move on to the final device in this chain, a reverb device, and this is the Plini Reverb. To access any of these devices, tap an empty space on the grid, go into Plugins, and then select Archetype Plini X, and you have all of the relevant devices in the device list. So now let's build a new preset completely from scratch, combining all these new features. So we've got a blank grid. Let's first add an amp. I'm going to go into Plugins, and from Archetype Plini X, choose Amp 2, the Plini Crunch amp. Now I'm going to add a cabinet. Let's go into Plugins again, Archetype Gojira X, and I'm going to select Cab 2 in mono. So let's hear how that sounds. Okay, so that's a nice basis to build upon. Let's now add an overdrive from Quad Cortex. Let's choose the Myth drive and change the settings a bit. Give it a bit more level. Here we go. So now we've got a bit more noise. I'm just going to quickly add a gate on the input, and I'm going to add a modulation device from Plini. So into plugins in the device list, Archetype Plini X, and I'm going to choose the Plini Chorus. And with the default settings, here's how it sounds. And to round this off, let's just give it a bit of space and add a reverb from Quad Cortex. And let's go for the modulated reverb, roll off some of the lows and highs, and see how that sounds. So let's save this as a new preset. For guitar. And there we go. We started off with a blank preset, and now we've got a sound combining compatible plugin devices as well as native Quad Cortex devices. Another incredibly useful feature is the ability to use scenes within plugin presets. So now let's take this a step further and utilize scenes, something that we've never been able to do up until now with plugin devices. I've built 4 quick scenes. I've got a clean on A, crunch on B, distortion on C, and a lead tone on D. First, let's hear the clean sound. Next, we've got our crunch sound on scene B. Next, we have our distorted sound on scene C. And finally, we have our lead tone on scene D. So now we have all of the new devices that this plugin compatibility update brings, and we can combine them with the powerful functionality of Quad Cortex, and it opens up a whole new world of possibilities for your sound. So from this default preset in Archetype Gojira X, I'm going to change a couple of the devices and then save it in a custom location in the directory. So I'm going to start off with the amplifier. I'm going to change this to amplifier number 2. And I'm going to bring back the gain a bit, as well as the bass, boost the presence and depth. I'm going to engage the Gojira overdrive, bring in the phaser, and also add a bit of the reverb. And here's how it sounds. Now I'm going to save this as I usually would any other Quad Cortex preset. At the top right, select the save icon. Then I'm going to go to a location I desire. Here I've got a setlist named Plugin Presets. In Bank 1, 1A, I'm going to select that empty space and call it New Preset. It's for guitar. Save. So as you can see, it's really easy and simple to take any plugin preset, modify it and customize it to your liking, and then save it wherever you want on Quad Cortex. Now it's possible to have multiple numbers of the same device from plugins. Currently, we're on this new preset that I saved, and I may want to have a short reverb from Gojira and then a longer reverb from Gojira and be able to switch between the two. So what I'm going to do is change the Gojira delay by going into the device list. Under Archetype Gojira X, I'm going to select the Gojira reverb and add it to the grid. So now we have two Gojira reverbs. On the first reverb, I've got a little bit of the mix in, not too much. I've got a shorter decay, and I've taken some of the low end out and left all the highs in. And here's how that sounds. However, for the second reverb, I've got a lot more mix. I have a longer decay, and I've also taken the lows and highs out of this reverb tail. When using multiple instances of devices from Archetype Gojira X, you can see how this can open up a new realm of possibilities when using them with the Quad Cortex. Another thing we can do, thanks to plugin compatibility in Quad Cortex, is mix native Quad Cortex devices with plugin devices. So for this, I'm going to change my second reverb to a reverb from Quad Cortex, and I'm going to select the modulated reverb. And this will give me a different reverb character to the one from Archetype Gojira X. And here's how this modulated reverb sounds. To access factory presets and artist presets, you would tap the top of the grid to enter the directory. At the top left, from the drop-down menu, select Plugin Presets. Select the plugin you want to go into. Here, we're going into Archetype Gojira X. And below that, you'll see we have Artist Presets, all in respective folders. And as well as that, Gojira Presets. And then finally, Factory Presets by Neural DSP, all available to play through. The ability to import custom presets will become available with a future CorOS update. So, as you can see, plugin compatibility from this CorOS update unlocks a whole new dimension of creative possibilities on Quad Cortex. Whether you want to nail the iconic tones of your favorite artists or dial in your own sounds, plugins on Quad Cortex give you the power and flexibility to do this. CorOS 3.0.0 introduces an incredible new feature, sidechaining. In essence, sidechaining is like an effect listening to another effect. And this means that on Quad Cortex, an effect can be linked via sidechain to trigger another effect later on in the signal chain. And this is a really creative tool because prior to this update, where you placed an effect determined when it would happen in the signal chain. But now, with sidechaining, you can have an effect trigger based on something that came before it in the chain, whilst the effect is placed wherever you want. And to demonstrate this sidechain effect, a really useful way of implementing it would be to add a gate at the end of a higher gain sound, but set the sidechain to read your dry guitar signal. And this means that it can cut off and gate the entire sound at the end of the chain while still reading the input from your dry guitar. And in simple terms, all it's doing is cutting off based on my guitar performance rather than trying to fight the higher gain sound. So let's add an adaptive gate. Selecting an empty space on the grid, go into Utility, and here you can see we have Adaptive Gate and Adaptive Gate S-C. S-C refers to sidechain, and any existing device on Quad Cortex that now has this sidechain feature added will follow this naming convention as well. Next, I'm going to bypass the input gate from the preset And going into the sidechain adaptive gate, I'm going to select the source of the sidechain to input 1, where my guitar is going in. And what this is doing is cutting off the noise based on my guitar input DI, as opposed to anything before the adaptive gate in the chain. So here's how it sounds with the sidechained adaptive gate bypassed. And here's the sidechained adaptive gate enabled. Sidechaining an envelope filter can also improve the tracking of the envelope filter as it's reading your guitar DI, while still having that after the amp envelope filtered sound. Here's how it sounds with the envelope filter after the amplifier and cab without the sidechain engaged. And now I'm going to set the source to input 1, and here's how it sounds sidechained. Whether you're using this as a utility device or as a tool to sculpt your sound, this CorOS update gives you a whole new level of creative control. This CorOS update features brand new devices that are available to all Quad Cortex users. The first device we're going to have a look at is transpose. So, on an empty block of the grid, I'm going to tap and in pitch select transpose. When opening this block up, you'll see we can either raise or lower the pitch of our guitar or input up to plus or minus 12 semitones. So here's my guitar, regular pitch with the transpose set at 0. Let's lower this, let's go -5. We could drop this all the way. Let's go -12, an octave below my dry guitar pitch. Conversely, we could raise this. Let's now go up 2 semitones. Or even further, let's go all the way up an octave. So this transpose device can be really useful to change key or pitch on the fly without having to change your performance or change instrument if you're using alternate tunings. The next device we're going to have a look at is the doubler, and this can be used to widen the stereo image and create that double tracked effect and make it sound like multiple guitars are playing the same part. So now let's add it to the grid and see how it sounds. On an empty space on the grid, I'm going to go down to Utility and select Doubler. When opening it up, you'll see we've got a few controls here that we can play around with. And the first parameter, Spread, is going to control the amount that one of the sides is delayed in milliseconds. And this can go all the way up to 60, where this effect will be at its most vivid. So here's how it sounds with the doubler bypassed. Now let's bring it in. With the current values, we've got 3 milliseconds of spread. Now let's increase this to a spread of around 36 milliseconds. And here's how the doubler sounds at its most extreme with a spread value of 60 milliseconds. So now spread's back at its original value of 6 milliseconds, and next to it we have a dry and effects level. This is going to control the respective levels of the non-delayed signal, i.e. the dry signal, and also the level of the delayed signal, which is going to be the effects level. So if you wanted more of the dry, non-delayed signal, all you'd do is increase that and maybe decrease the effects level, and then in the stereo width balance you'll hear more of the non-delayed sound. So vice versa, let's turn up the delayed signal and have a bit less of the dry. So you can think of these two controls as your left and right level of your double guitar sound. And as you can see, next to this, the doubler has the sidechain feature built into it. So going on the source drop-down menu, we have all the options of where you can trigger this sidechain from. The next device we're going to have a look at is called the transparent blend. And this can be used to mix any two signals together. In this simple example, what I'm going to do is blend a clean amp sound with a completely transparent DI taken from the input of Quad Cortex. And this will create a nice blended funk guitar tone where often clean amps and DI'd guitars are used in combinations anyway. So on the grid, I'm going to tap after the speaker, go into utility, and go down to transparent blend. When opening this up, I'm first going to set the source to input 1, and that means that it will read the input of Quad Cortex, input 1, where my guitar is plugged in. And then, using the blend dial, I can blend this in to 50%. And that means that it's going to give me 50% of the DI, which is completely transparent, and 50% of the clean amp sound. And I'm also just going to boost the output a couple of dB. So here's how my tone sounds bypassed without the blend of the DI. And here's how it sounds with a blend of my DI and the clean amp tone. And for the sake of demonstration purposes, if I had the blend at 100%, you'd only be hearing the sidechain signal, i.e. the input DI. So that's transparent blend. On the surface, a very simple device, but it could be taken further to offer a new level of creative control. The next device we're going to have a look at is pitch correction. This device corrects the pitch of your incoming signal to match a selected scale. This can be used to improve the intonation and tuning of vocals or fretless instruments. Going onto an empty space on the grid, I'm going to go into pitch and select pitch correction. So when opening it up, you'll see we first have a root option. Currently, this is grayed out because we're in chromatic mode. This means that every semitone is available. But if we selected major, now we can choose our root. And this is going to go chromatically from A all the way to G sharp. Moving on, we then have tuning, and this can set the target pitch to be set to 440 Hz tuning, which is the standard globally, or you can change this down all the way to 400 Hz, which is slightly flatter, or sharpen it to 480 Hz. Next to this, we then have the quantize dial, and when set to 100%, the strength of this pitch correction will mean that the pitch will go to the desired note. If it's set to 50%, it will do this slightly less, and at 0%, it won't quantize the note at all. Next to this, we've then got glissando, and this is measured in milliseconds, and it refers to the amount of time it takes for the note to be corrected. At shorter values, this will mean that the note zips up to the corrected pitch, and at longer values, in milliseconds, it will take a longer time for the note to be corrected. And to quickly demonstrate this, I'll set the glissando all the way at 0, and if I just play an A note and bend it up to the next note in the scale, you'll hear it quickly snap to the next note with 0 milliseconds. If I increase this, there'll be more of a glide between the notes. And here's how it sounds at its maximum 500 millisecond value. Below this, we then have a high pass filter. This will control the amount of high frequencies passing through. So currently it's off. All of the lows aren't cut. But if you increase this, those lows are getting cut out. And there all the highs are passing through. Conversely, next to that, we then have a low pass. So as you reduce this, you're going to have more of those lows pass through and the highs are going to get cut. And then finally, we have an output dial, and that's just going to be a master volume from this device. This pitch correction device can be used with a variety of sources, but here I'm going to use it to sweeten the intonation of a slide guitar part. The next device we're going to have a look at is called circular delay, and this effect is inspired by the Lexicon PCM 70. A circular delay is a type of delay where each of the repeats are circulated in a cascading pattern. This means that each repetition of the delay is fed into the beginning of the delay line, and this creates a continuous evolving wash of sound. On the grid, I'm just going to tap an empty space, go into delay, and select circular delay. And the first control when opening it up is the mix. And currently this is set at 50%, so you'll hear a nice 50-50 blend of my dry guitar and the circular delay effect. Next to this, we then have the tap preset, and this has a variety of options from 1 all the way to 6 with a few alternate versions as well. And the way to think about this is the amount of repetitions that are going to be cascading in this circular motion. So on 1, it sounds like this. If I then move it to number 2, you're going to have 2 of these cascading. And you'll hear this is in a nice stereo width. Moving on to 3, you're going to have 3 of those in the space of 2. And then 4. And as I just mentioned, these all crucially are going to be over the same period of time. And you can set this as normal with the tap tempo. On this next 4 alt setting, sounds like this. On number 5, we're going to have 5 different repeats now. The next setting is 5 alt. Next, we're on to 6 repeats. And finally, we've got 6 alt. Next to this, we then have the sync function, and this will either sync it to the tap tempo, division, or to a delay time measured in milliseconds, as shown by either the sync note dial in sync mode or the delay time with millisecond values. Below that, at the bottom, we have feedback, and this will determine the amount of delay repeats. So if we're on tap preset number 2 and we have a feedback of 30%, it sounds like this. If we lowered this, we'd have a fewer number of repeats. And if we raised it, we'd have a lot more. The next parameter in the circular delay is diffusion. And as you increase this, the delay repeats are going to degrade and become less defined as they go on. So with diffusion off, here's how it sounds. Now it's just over halfway. From and finally at 100%. Next, we've got a high pass, and as you increase this, it's going to roll off the low frequencies of the repeats. So, with it at 20 Hertz, we've still got all that low end information. If we roll this off to around 5,000, you'll hear there all the low end goes from the delay repeats. And conversely, with the low pass, as you decrease this, this will roll off all the high end information. And with that all the way up, you'll hear all of that top end. If we bring it back, they'll get darker. Next, we're on to the modulation rate at the bottom right here, and also on page 2, the modulation depth. So to demonstrate this, I'm just going to bring in around 50% modulation depth and show you how modulation rate sounds at 0.5 Hertz. So it's added a nice modulation there. If I bring this down, that rate will be a lot slower. As well as less vivid and audible. But if I increase this, we'll have a quicker rate and it will be a lot more vivid. If I set the modulation rate back to 0.5 Hertz, and now we move on to modulation depth, if I set this at its minimum value, the modulation won't be occurring because there's no depth for it to modulate. However, as I increase this, we're going to have a greater increase in pitch modulation. And if I do this all the way, you'll get its maximum vividness. Finally, we have a vintage mode toggle switch, and bringing this in adds some low pass filtering to the delay repeats. And with it off, it sounds like this. And now let's turn this on. And then finally, we have a trails toggle switch. When this is on, it means that even if you bypass this block, the repeats will still continue. But when it's off and you bypass the block, the repeats will stop. So if I have this on, and bypass and re-engage it, you'll hear the repeats continued. But if I set trails to off and play a chord, bypassing the block stops the repeats as well. On top of the devices that we've covered, there are also additional plugin devices that have exactly the same settings and parameters as the plugin versions. The first plugin device we're going to have a look at is the plugin blend. So I'm going to tap an empty space on the grid, select utility, and then plugin blend. You'll notice here that the parameters look very similar to the transparent blend. However, there is one key difference. With the transparent blend, you brought in an unprocessed version of the sidechain signal selectable by the source. However, with the plugin blend, this is going to have fixed EQ and compression parameters. So I'm going to select this to input 1, and that's going to be the DI of my guitar. And if I put the blend at 100%, you'll hear a very bright and compressed version of my guitar DI. And at 0, this is just going to be a amp and cab sound. Now I can blend the two. The next device we're going to have a look at is the plugin gate. And in this empty space on the grid, I'm going to go into utility and select plugin gate. And now I'm going to bypass the gate on the input. And you'll hear there that this plugin gate is cutting off the noise, and it's set to -80 on the threshold. Next, we're going to have a look at the plugin doubler. So, empty space on the grid. After the cabinet, I'm going to go into Utility and select the plugin doubler. When loading this up, you'll see we've just got two different settings. The first one, a variable spread in milliseconds again, adjusting the severity and the width of this stereo spreading effect. And next to that, we then have the source where you can select the sidechain input. Here, I'm going to select input 1 and set the spread to a nice wide 20 millisecond value, the maximum that it would be in the plugin. Without the plugin doubler engaged, sounds like this. And now engaging the plugin doubler. Next, we've got the plugin graphic 9, and on the grid, I'm going to tap an empty space, go into EQ, and select it from the list. And when opening up, you'll see that we've got some nice faders to drag each of these respective bands down like you would just on the plugin. As well as that, on page 2, we have the high and low pass filters and an overall output as well. It's worth noting that this plugin version of the Graphic 9 has a slightly different sound due to the different Q values for the filters. As part of this new CorOS update, there have been a few quality of life improvements to make using the Quad Cortex easier than ever. First up, you can organize your neural captures and impulse responses using custom folders. To do this, go into the directory, and at the top left, use the drop-down menu to select neural captures. Below this, you'll see we have downloads, captures library, factory captures, my captures, but you can also create a new folder and you've got a new location to save your neural captures. If you wanted to organize this further, you can select these three dots and select New Subfolder, where you can add an even further level of organization with another folder. This filing system in the directory can also be applied in exactly the same way to the impulse responses. Within each of their respective libraries, you can hold a total of 2048 neural captures and 2048 impulse responses. Each library has a maximum of 30 folders, where folders and subfolders contribute to this limit. When you organize a capture or impulse response to a folder, a link is created from that capture or impulse response to the folder. This means that you can have the same neural capture or impulse response in multiple folders without that file being duplicated. When deleting an item, selecting the three dots brings up an option to either delete this from the library, cancel, your choice, or to remove it from the folder. So if we remove it, that's going to remove it from this folder, but not delete it from your library, as it will still show up in your IR directory. However, if I selected delete from library, this would then delete that impulse response or neural capture from my Quad Cortex. We've now streamlined the UI to have unified add or change device screens. If I went to change this amplifier, selecting change device, you'll now see that I can audition different models. And when I've selected one that I want to add or change, I select the blue tick and now it's on the grid in the same place. And this makes changing or adding devices so much quicker and easier. The UI for preset MIDI out has been redesigned so that you can have multiple MIDI messages going out from a single foot switch. To get to this menu, you select the top three dots, go down to preset MIDI out, and then by selecting any of the foot switches, you can type in various different MIDI information, all for the same foot switch. And each of these foot switches have up to 12 different types of MIDI commands. On top of that, each expression pedal can have up to 4 CC messages each. And the great thing about all of this new MIDI accessibility is that it allows you to simplify live performance setups. On the Quad Cortex, we now have bulk actions accessible in the directory. Opening that up, and at the top, we have the multi-select toggle tool. Here, you can select any number of presets, or you can use this top left button to select everything available in the list. And with this, you can cut, copy, paste, favorite, upload, download, or delete any number of items at the same time. So that was a deep dive into the latest update for Quad-Cortex, CorOS 3.0.0. We're extremely proud and excited to bring plugin compatibility to Quad-Cortex, but included in this update is so much more. We've added a ton of new devices for everyone, including the transparent blend, doubler, transpose, and circular delay. Plus, sidechaining unlocks incredible creative control over your sound. And we've seriously leveled up the usability of Quad-Cortex with bulk actions, custom folders, and a load of other quality of life upgrades. This is a huge leap forward for Quad-Cortex, and it's available to download to your device now. To see a full list of changes and to learn about everything CorOS 3.0.0 offers, head on over to neuraldsp.com. I've been John Connearn. Thanks for watching.